Picture a sun-drenched, ancient capital right on the edge of the Tyrrhenian Sea. A sprawling, vibrant city of 630,000 people that has somehow landed on almost every single cheapest places to live in Europe list published over the last couple of years. But if you flip the page, you'll find that same city sitting at the very top of almost every report on Italy's most economically distressed regions. Both of these realities, they are completely true at the exact same time. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the ultimate paradox of Sicily's capital. What does it actually mean to live in a place that is simultaneously Europe's most affordable destination and its most economically challenged?
Okay, so let's get right into it. If you walk up to someone and ask, hey, what does it cost to live here? The most honest answer you're ever going to get is simply, well, it depends entirely on which Palermo you're asking about. Right? Are you asking about the city where your income gets wired in every month from Milan or London, or maybe a corporate client in New York? Or are you asking about the city where your income is earned, taxed, and spent entirely inside Sicily? Because the reality is, the cost of your life here is dictated exclusively by where your money comes from.
The sheer scale of this gap is just staggering. Let's start with rent, because that's the biggest line item in anyone's budget, right? A one-bedroom apartment right in Palermo's historic center averages around 800 to 900 euros a month. And actually, if you move just outside the center, you can drop that down to 500. Now contrast that with Milan, which is Italy's financial hub. Up there, a central one-bedroom is going to run you anywhere from 1,200 to well over 2,000 euros. To put that into perspective for you, to match a lifestyle that costs about 4,900 euros in Palermo, you would literally need around 7,400 euros a month in Milan. So yeah, Palermo is substantially cheaper. But to understand why it's cheaper, we've got to look a little deeper beneath the surface.
Palermo shows up on almost every cheapest places to live in Europe list published in the last 2 years. It also shows up in almost every report on Italy's most economically distressed regions. Both of those things are true at the same time, and this episode is about what that actually means if you move here. The honest answer to what does it cost to live in Palermo depends entirely on which Palermo you're asking about. The one where income arrives from Milan, London, or a client in New York, or the one where income is earned, taxed, and spent entirely inside Sicily. Palermo is the capital of Sicily, Italy's largest island, with a population of roughly 630,000, making it the fifth largest city in the country. It sits on the northern coast, facing the Tyrrhenian Sea, a few hours by ferry or a short flight from mainland Italy. Start with rent, because it's the single biggest line item in almost anyone's budget. A one-bedroom apartment in Palermo's city center averages somewhere around 800 to 900 euros a month. Move outside the center and that drops to roughly 500 to 550 euros. Compare that to Milan, where a one-bedroom in the center runs anywhere from about 1,200 to over 2,000 euros a month, depending on the neighborhood. That's the number most people picture when they think cost of living in Italy, and it's simply not the number that applies here. Numbio's cost of living plus rent comparison estimates that someone in Milan would need around 7,400 euros a month to match a lifestyle that costs about 4,900 euros in Palermo. Other comparison sites put the overall gap closer to a third cheaper. The exact percentage moves depending on the source, but the direction is consistent. Palermo is substantially, not marginally, cheaper than Italy's financial capital. Groceries, restaurants, and utilities follow the same pattern. A basic lunchtime meal at a neighborhood trattoria typically runs under 10 euros. Utilities for an average apartment, electricity, water, gas, and garbage, land somewhere around 150 to 220 euros a month, higher in winter and summer when heating or cooling kicks in. So far, this sounds like the standard cheap Italian city pitch. Here's where it gets more complicated. That low cost of living exists next to one of the weakest regional economies in the European Union. Sicily's regional unemployment rate has hovered between 14% and 16% in recent years, roughly double the national Italian average. Youth unemployment is far worse. Multiple regional studies put joblessness among Sicilians under 30 somewhere between 40% and 50%, among the highest figures in the EU. The average annual salary in Sicily sits around 26,000 euros gross, compared to roughly 38,000 euros in Lombardy, the northern region that includes Milan. After taxes and social contributions, that translates to a local net income that researchers estimate at somewhere close to 1,200 to 1,300 euros a month for a full-time worker. One cost of living tracker puts Palermo's median after-tax salary at just enough to cover about 1.2 months of that same person's living expenses, meaning almost no built-in margin for savings, emergencies, or anything beyond the basics. For comparison, the same metric in Milan comes out to almost exactly 1 month, despite Milan's much higher nominal salaries, because Milan's costs rise just as fast as its wages do. In other words, neither city's local salary leaves much slack. Palermo is cheaper, but its wages are proportionally lower, and the region has struggled with this exact gap, wages that don't keep pace with even a reduced cost of living, for decades. That gap has a well-documented consequence. For years, the most common trajectory for an educated young Sicilian has been to leave. University graduates and even PhD holders relocate to northern Italy or abroad, chasing jobs that actually match their qualifications. Sicily has one of Italy's highest shares of young people who are neither employed nor in education, close to 28%, according to regional labor data. So that's the first Palermo, a regional economy with high structural unemployment, wages compressed even relative to its lower costs, and a documented pattern of its most qualified young people leaving for opportunities elsewhere. It's worth noting the region isn't standing still on its own terms, either. Italy's EU-funded recovery plan earmarks roughly 40% of its total resources out of a national envelope of about 194 billion euros specifically for the Mezzogiorno, the country's southern regions including Sicily. Projects range from a new undersea power cable linking Sicily's grid to the mainland to broader digitization and transport investment. Implementation has been uneven and slower than planned in places, which is a fair criticism, but the funding commitment itself is real and larger than anything the region has seen in decades. There's a term Italian researchers use for the phenomenon this episode has been circling: south working. It describes professionals who keep a job or client base anchored in the north or abroad while physically living in the south, made newly viable by remote work. It's presented as a tool for economic rebalancing, bringing skilled income south without requiring southern employers to create the jobs first. Whether it rebalances anything or simply adds a wealthier layer on top of the existing gap is, again, the open question this episode keeps returning to. Now the second Palermo. Over the past 2 to 3 years, the same city has become something researchers are now describing as Italy's leading destination for remote workers and digital nomads. A genuinely unusual reversal for a city more commonly associated with the country's south to north brain drain. Between 2023 and 2024, innovative startups registered in Palermo grew by roughly 3.7%, while the number of new startups fell by about 7% across the rest of the country over the same period. Employment in Palermo grew by close to 6.9% in that window, more than 4 times the national average growth rate. Part of what's driving that is Italy's Digital Nomad Visa, in force since April 2024. It targets non-EU remote workers and freelancers who work for employers or clients based outside Italy, with a minimum income requirement of 28,000 euros a year, the lowest threshold among southern European countries offering this kind of visa. The visa is renewable annually for up to 3 years and doesn't require a separate work permit. For freelancers who register locally, Italy's flat-rate tax scheme, the regime forfettario, applies a 5% tax rate for the first 5 years on income up to 85,000 euros, a significant discount from the standard progressive tax system. Here's a caveat worth flagging directly, because it circulates incorrectly across a lot of relocation content. Many articles claim southern Italy offers digital nomads a flat 7% tax rate. That specific 7% regime is real, but it applies to foreign retirees relocating to small municipalities under 20,000 people, not to digital nomad visa holders. Conflating the two is a common and understandable mistake, but it's not the regime that applies to most remote workers moving to Palermo. As of the most recent information available, Italy's 2026 budget law includes a draft proposal for a dedicated tax incentive specifically for digital nomad visa holders, separate from the retiree scheme and separate from the existing impatriate regime. It had not been enacted as of the sources checked for this episode, so treat it as pending rather than confirmed, and verify current status before planning finances around it. There is a confirmed update, though. Italy's Interior Ministry clarified in April 2026 that spouses and dependent children of digital nomad visa holders can work or start a business in Italy without needing to pass the standard labor market test. That's a meaningful advantage for couples where both partners work remotely, and it puts Italy ahead of some competing countries on this specific point. Before getting to who actually lives inside this second Palermo, it's worth pausing on a question almost everyone researching the city asks first: what about the Mafia? Palermo's association with Cosa Nostra is real history, not invention, and it shaped the city well into living memory. The turning point was the early 1990s. Prosecuting magistrates Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino led a mass trial that convicted hundreds of Mafia members, and were both assassinated in retaliation within 2 months of each other in 1992. Those killings triggered a public backlash that, over the following decades, significantly weakened the organization's grip on daily life in the city. Here's what the numbers say today. Italy's National Statistics Office has reported that Palermo's overall crime rate, based on total reported offenses, not just headline categories, is lower than Milan, Rome, or Naples. One frequently cited comparison put Palermo at under half of Milan's reported crimes per 100,000 residents. Palermo still ranks 4th in Italy for mafia-related prosecutions, which tells you organized crime hasn't vanished, but it also isn't the daily life threat the city's reputation suggests. What organized crime looks like in Palermo today is mostly institutional: construction contracts, waste management, extortion of local businesses through the Piso, protection payments. It is not street violence directed at residents or visitors. The actual, statistically supported risk for anyone living here is far more mundane: pickpocketing in crowded markets like Bolaro and Buxeria, and opportunistic theft around the main train station after dark. Healthcare works differently depending on which visa route someone arrives on, and it's a detail that trips people up. The digital nomad visa itself does not include automatic enrollment in Italy's public health service, the SSN. Anyone applying needs private international health insurance covering at least €30,000 before they arrive, including hospitalization and repatriation. Once someone actually holds an Italian residence permit, the picture changes. Freelancers who register locally and obtain a Partita IVA, an Italian VAT number, can typically enroll in the SSN through their tax registration. Remote employees of a foreign company generally can't do that automatically, and instead pay a fixed annual voluntary contribution, which recent legislative changes have pushed toward roughly €2,000 a year for the applicant, covering the same standard of care as any Italian resident. Italy's healthcare system is consistently ranked among the stronger public systems in Europe, and specialist consultations under the SSN typically cost between €20 and €50 as a co-payment rather than the full private rate. For anyone budgeting a move, the honest summary is: expect a private insurance gap in the first months, and a modest but real annual cost afterward if you're not paying in through payroll. Infrastructure is the other practical question worth answering honestly rather than glossing over. Fiber internet coverage in central Palermo has expanded substantially in the past few years, and remote workers commonly report speeds in the range of 80 to 100 megabits per second in modern buildings. Older buildings in the historic center can still be hit or miss, so verifying an apartment's actual connection before signing a lease is a reasonable precaution, not paranoia. The co-working scene is real but still developing compared to Milan or Bologna. Changes Co-working, near Teatro Massimo, offers private offices and 24-hour access in a converted 1,500 square meter space. Beat Community describes itself as the first dedicated co-living operation in Sicily, combining shared housing with workspace for remote professionals. Smaller, informal options, cafes with reliable Wi-Fi and a laptop-friendly culture, fill in the gaps around the center. Getting around the city itself doesn't require a car. The historic center and the districts remote workers tend to favor, like Palatima and Liberta, are walkable, and buses cover the rest. Public transport has a reputation for being less reliable than in northern Italian cities, with irregular schedules a common complaint, though the compact size of the city limits how much that actually matters day to day. Climate is one of the more straightforward selling points, and it doesn't need much qualification: Mediterranean, with mild winters rarely dropping below 10 degrees Celsius and hot, dry summers that push well past 30. It's a genuine quality of life advantage over the Baltic and Central European cities this series has also covered, where several months of the year are simply cold. Palermo's layered history is also worth naming. because it shapes daily life more than most cost-of-living guides mention. Phoenician, Roman, Arab, Norman, and Spanish rule each left a mark. The city's Arab-Norman monuments and cathedral are recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and that architectural mix is part of what residents describe as the city's distinct, slightly chaotic energy, closer in feel to Naples than to the postcard version of Italy further north. So who actually lives inside this second Palermo? Broadly, it's remote employees and freelancers earning euros, dollars, or pounds from clients or employers outside Sicily, someone clearing 28,000 to 50,000 euros a year in income earned elsewhere, spending it inside one of Europe's cheaper capitals of a region. Run the arithmetic on that profile and it looks very different from the local salary numbers earlier in this episode. Someone earning 30,000 euros a year from a foreign client, taxed at 5% under the flat rate regime, keeps close to 28,500 euros, well over double the typical local net salary, while paying roughly the same rent as everyone else in the same building. That's the mechanism behind the two economy pattern this series keeps running into, city after city. It isn't that Palermo itself got richer. It's that a small, growing population of people earning outside income moved into a city where local wages stayed largely where they were. Property prices reflect the same split. Buying in Palermo's historic center averages roughly 2,400 to 2,500 euros per square meter. Move to the periphery and that drops to around 1,200 to 1,300 euros. Compare that to a national average closer to 2,150 euros per square meter, or Milan, where central prices run well above 2,600 euros and climb sharply from there in sought-after districts. None of this means the two Palermos never interact. A remote worker still buys groceries from a local shop, rents from a local landlord, hires a local commercialista and accountant to file Italian taxes. Some of that income does flow into the local economy. But it flows through, rather than closing, the wage gap described earlier in this episode. Practical friction is worth naming honestly, too. Internet infrastructure and co-working density in southern Italy generally lag behind Milan or Bologna. Daily bureaucracy registering with the local municipality, applying for a residence permit at the questura, the local police headquarters is commonly reported to run slower in the south, sometimes taking weeks longer than the same process further north. Language is another real barrier. The visa application itself can typically be completed in English, but daily life, the supermarket, the real estate agent, the questura appointment runs almost entirely in Italian outside the most tourist pockets of the center. Anyone planning to stay beyond a year should expect to need at least functional Italian. Put two composite profiles side by side and the split becomes concrete. A Palermo-born graphic designer working a full-time local contract earns close to the regional average, call it 1,250 euros net a month, covering rent, groceries, and utilities with very little left over, consistent with the 1.2-month coverage ratio cited earlier. A remote software developer on the Digital Nomad Visa, earning 40,000 euros a year from a company based in Berlin, keeps roughly 38,000 euros after the flat rate tax and rents an apartment 2 streets over from the designer, for close to the same price. Same city, same rent, radically different financial reality. A third profile completes the picture, the owner of a small trattoria near Bolaro Market, whose customer base has shifted over the past few years to include a steady trickle of foreign remote workers alongside the usual local regulars. Her revenue has genuinely grown outside money is spending inside her business, exactly the mechanism this episode described earlier. Her own household budget, though, is still set by local prices and a local income, which means she's a direct beneficiary of the second Palermo without belonging to it financially. A few smaller practicalities round out the picture. Opening an Italian bank account typically requires a codice fiscale, a tax code, issued quickly at a local tax office, plus proof of address and a residence permit, and most digital nomads report the process taking anywhere from a same-day appointment to a couple of weeks depending on the bank. Some remote workers avoid the friction entirely for the first several months by relying on international cards and services like Wise, switching to a local account once residency paperwork clears. On daily food costs specifically, a cappuccino and cornetto at a standing bar counter typically runs 2 to 3 euros, a full sit-down dinner for 2 with wine at a mid-range restaurant lands around 40 to 55 euros, and weekly grocery spending for one person cooking most meals at home tends to fall between 40 and 60 euros. Street food, the arancine, panel, and sfinchin this city is genuinely known for is cheap enough that it functions as a real budget category, not just a tourist indulgence. Palermo isn't the only southern Italian city competing for this population, and it's worth being honest about that too. Catania, on Sicily's east coast, has its own growing remote work community anchored around the university and a somewhat more developed tech scene. Lecce, in Puglia, offers a similar low-cost, high-heritage pitch with a smaller but tighter expat network. None of these cities has pulled decisively ahead. The choice between them usually comes down to flight connections, personal taste in coastline versus Baroque architecture, and how much Italian bureaucracy someone is willing to tolerate for a given price point. It's also fair to say the experience is genuinely polarizing, and this series would be doing its editorial standard a disservice by pretending otherwise. Online accounts from people who've actually lived here split sharply. Some describe 2 months in Palermo as a highlight of their nomad years, citing the food, the light, the sense of a real city rather than a curated destination. Others describe the same city as chaotic, poorly maintained, and difficult to settle into. Both accounts tend to come from people who otherwise like living abroad, which suggests the variable isn't remote work readiness, it's personal fit with a genuinely rough-edged, unpolished city. One question this series always asks directly, is this inflow pricing locals out, the way it's been documented in Lisbon or Mexico City? Academic research specifically on Palermo's historic center offers a more measured answer than the headlines from those other cities suggest. A recent urban studies analysis found that Palermo's rent gap doesn't yet show the severe gentrification pattern seen elsewhere, largely because the historic center's population had already collapsed from around 120,000 residents in the mid-20th century to roughly 45,000 by the late 1970s, due to decades of abandonment and underinvestment, long before any digital nomad arrived. In other words, the historic center had so much vacant, deteriorating housing stock that new arrivals, digital nomads, tourists, redevelopment capital have so far been filling gaps rather than displacing existing residents en masse. The researchers are careful to note this isn't a guarantee it stays that way as short-term rental platforms expand, but as of the most recent data, Palermo's situation looks structurally different from the sharper displacement crises documented elsewhere. None of this is presented as a criticism of either person, it's simply what the data shows when it's laid out side by side. It's also, worth saying plainly, not unique to Palermo. This series has now documented a version of the same pattern in Belgrade and in Tirana, cities where outside income and local wages coexist in the same rental market without ever quite converging. What makes Palermo a slightly different case is the direction of the story. Belgrade and Tirana were never major departure points for their own educated populations in the way Sicily has been for decades. Palermo's digital nomad growth is happening in a city with an actively documented brain drain problem, which raises a genuinely open question about whether this trend eventually reverses that pattern, or simply runs alongside it. There's a version of that answer already visible in the employment numbers from 2023 to 2024, a 6.9% jump in Palermo, 4 times the national rate. Whether that growth is reaching the young Sicilians the region has historically struggled to employ, or is concentrated among newcomers and returning transplants, is the harder question, and the available data doesn't fully settle it either way. For anyone actually weighing a move, the practical takeaway is straightforward: the widely quoted cheap Sicily numbers are real, but they describe the cost side of the ledger, not the income side. Whether Palermo works financially depends far less on the city than on where the money is coming from before it arrives here. One last practical note for anyone actually mapping out a timeline: budget for roughly 4 to 6 months from first application to a fully settled life here, visa processing of 1 to 4 months, followed by municipal registration within 8 days of arrival, then a residence permit appointment at the questura that can itself take several weeks to schedule and process. None of these steps is difficult individually. Collectively, they require patience most guides undersell. Whether that arrangement counts as an opportunity for the city or a parallel economy that never quite reaches the people who need it most is a question this episode isn't going to answer for you. The numbers are on the table. What you make of them probably depends on which side of that ledger you'd actually be standing on.